Hey guys, so this video is obviously not anything medical related. This has to do with my most recent previous employment, which was working as a special education paraprofessional. I am still a member of a few paraprofessional groups on Facebook, and someone had posted this question recently, and I thought it might be interesting to some of you for me to address it in a video form. So the question is, what's the hardest thing about being a para? Um, Para being paraprofessional. I think there are a lot of difficult things about working as a paraprofessional. I think one of the first things that tends to be an issue is the fact that we are technically, and a lot of the times, just kind of thrown into things with no real training, not necessarily any real preparation, not a whole lot of information given to us about who we will be working with, what types of students, what kind of assistance they may need. And it is definitely a job where, at least in my experience, you have to learn as you go. And I don't think that that gives you the best start at things, but that was how things went, at least in my experience. I think another difficult thing about working as a paraprofessional is learning how to handle student behaviors in a productive way, learning how to find a method that you can use to take someone who's having a really rough day and turn those behaviors into something more productive, figuring out a way to mitigate some unnecessary behaviors, or figuring out ways to better communicate with the students that you're working with. And that can be very difficult, especially if you have a student who has verbal communication issues, where they may not be able to verbally express what they need or what they want or how they're feeling to you. Learning how to use like visuals or whatever other forms of communication that your student knows how to communicate with you in. That doesn't really make sense. I think that's really helpful as well. I would say another thing is like trying not to become attached to your students. Obviously, you want to have a bond with your students. You want to have a positive relationship with them, but you also need to make sure that you're not crossing any boundaries. And sometimes that can be hard, especially when you have students who are special needs, who you work with on a daily basis. It happened with me, not as far as like crossing boundaries, but like I had a really strong connection, especially with my one-to-one. I had two one-to-ones for a majority of the time that I worked at the school. But one of my one-to-ones in particular was like to the point where her mother would come to the school to drop her off in the morning, and she would run straight to me. She would stand by me. She knew that she could hold my hand, that, she could ask to go to the classroom instead of standing in the cafeteria, and I would bring her to the classroom instead of making her stand in the cafeteria and waiting for the bell to ring, where she'd be just overstimulated because there were so many kids in the cafeteria every morning, and she didn't like the bell ringing either. So she could just ask me, and we'd go to the classroom, and she could sit on the bean bags or sit in the chair or whatever and just kind of chill. But like it got to a point where I did eventually ask one of our teachers to kind of step in or switch me out with the other para, because sometimes when I would be working with her in her kindergarten class, instead of focusing on what her general education teacher was trying to teach, she would try to run and sit on my lap, or she would try to come over to me and sit next to me at the table, or she would just kind of run into the corner, which she was always listening wherever she was sitting at. She would listen to what her general education teacher was saying, but she wasn't necessarily like sitting by the rest of her classmates or anything like that. Sometimes she would get a little bit disruptive with like vocal stimming, and it could get distracting for the other students sometimes, and it would get sometimes to the point where I would have to take her out of the classroom, and then she'd be screaming, and obviously that's not what you want from your student. So I do think that that's why they had wanted to move me to the high school, is because I had asked for one of our other teachers to kind of step in and switch me out so that like we could kind of break that dependence, because I wanted my student to know that I was there, to know that she was safe with me and that I was there to support her. But I also wanted her to be independent and to be able to do things on her own and not necessarily rely on me for assistance, if that makes sense. And I think that honestly, that is one of the hardest things, is like being there and being supportive of your students and offering them the assistance that they need, but also knowing when you have to kind of pull back and allow them to achieve things on their own and, you know, not be so dependent. Like, independence is definitely something that you are trying to achieve, especially when you're working as a special education paraprofessional. You want them to be able to do things on their own. You want them to be able to accomplish everything that the rest of their peers are accomplishing, or at least everything that they're able to accomplish with whatever skills that they have or whatever level that they're at. And so, like, it's a very thin line between too much assistance and, you know, not enough. And it's kind of frustrating to try to figure that out. So anyways, if you have worked in special education or you have worked as a paraprofessional before, I'm curious to see what you think is the hardest thing about being a paraprofessional. I definitely miss all of the students that I got to work with throughout my time working at the school. I miss kind of, you know, seeing them achieve something, seeing how happy they are, seeing those special moments like when my one-to-one, who initially was basically nonverbal at the beginning of the school year, seeing her like interacting with her classmates and speaking up, you know, when something bothered her, and like trying to interact with other people when at the beginning of the school year she was like kind of isolated on purpose. She would isolate herself. I think it was great to see that. And I do miss, you know, being able to interact with them on a daily basis. But I have moved on, and I do still think that I made the correct decision for myself. So anyways, that is it for today's video. If you guys have any questions or topics you'd like me to discuss in the future on my channel, please be sure to let me know. I would be glad to get something filmed for you. And with that being said, I will talk to you guys next time.